After the election results were announced, a heavy cloud hung over Lagos. Crowds gathered at street corners, their faces full of hope and worry at the same time. Peter Obi's supporters believed with all their hearts that he had won. They wore his blue and white campaign colors like badges of pride. They carried banners and chanted his name in soft yet determined voices. Each chant carried a wish for honest leadership and a fresh start. But when the official announcement named Bola Tinubu as the winner, those same streets filled with silent anger. People felt their dreams slip away in that moment. Some clenched their fists and stared at their phones. Others dropped their heads and walked on, uncertain what to do next. Across the city, in grand halls, with high ceilings and polished floors, diplomats and presidents met for an ECOWAS summit. The room buzzed with quiet conversations about trade, security, and how best to guide West Africa through changing times. Flags stood behind each speaker like colorful sentinels: green, white, red, blue, yellow. Journalists typed on laptops and whispered into microphones. Press photographers clicked their cameras like a steady rain of light. The setting was formal and serious, yet under the surface, old rivalries simmered. In one corner, a group of young Nigerian delegates compared notes on the election. Their faces showed both excitement and worry as they wondered how the summit would handle the growing protests back home. When President Tinubu took the stage, the hall fell into respectful silence. He wore a dark suit and a crisp white shirt, his posture calm but firm. He greeted each member with a nod and a handshake, as if nothing unusual had happened in his country. Then he turned to speak about regional cooperation. His voice was steady, but in his eyes was a spark. Without warning, his tone shifted. He glanced at Peter Obi's empty seat among the audience and made a remark that cut through the polite atmosphere. He said, "My friend Peter thinks too much about dreams. He forgets to think about facts. He is a daydreamer." The words echoed in the hall like a sudden drumbeat. Some listeners stiffened in their seats. Others glanced at their notes, unsure they heard correctly. A faint murmur ran through the room. Diplomats exchanged puzzled looks. A few coughed politely. Camera flashes went off as reporters captured the moment. The insult was public, bold, and unexpected. Peter Obi's name, spoken in that context, felt like a challenge thrown at more than one person. Inside the hall, some delegates shifted in. Discomfort? They had come to talk about shared goals and mutual respect, not political jabs. Yet there was something in Tinubu's Tony Quell parts, amusement and disdain that made everyone sit up and pay attention. Back in Nigeria, the moment was replayed on television and radio within minutes. Street vendors sold snacks beside televisions, set up on small tables. A vendor wiping sauce from his chin stopped mid-motion when he heard the replay. His eyes widened. He leaned closer to the screen. In living rooms across Lagos, Kano, and Enugu, families paused their dinner to watch the clip. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others laughed uneasily. Across rural villages where power flickered on and off, people gathered near open windows, or under the glow of lanterns to listen to battery-operated radios. The insult spread faster than wildfire, carried by human voices, by loudspeakers, by smartphone alerts. On social media, the reaction was instant and intense. Hashtags like hashtag #DayDreamerTinUbu and hashtag #RespectOurVoice trended within hours. Users shared short clips of the summit, adding bold text overlays or witty commentary. Memes appeared showing Tinubu wearing jester hats or carrying a pretend microphone at a comedy show. Others edited in images of Obi calmly taking notes, highlighting his cool demeanor in contrast. Supporters flooded comments with messages like, "Leaders should lead, not mock, and let's keep our debates respectful." Opponents cheered Tinubu's words, calling Obi an impossible dreamer who had no practical plans. The debate spun out across continents as members of the Nigerian diaspora joined in from London, New York, and Johannesburg. Scale and speed surprised even the most seasoned observers. Meanwhile, in the offices of civil society groups, organizers held urgent meetings. They gathered around long tables strewn with printed screenshots, planning their next moves. Some suggested peaceful rallies in major cities. Others proposed letter-writing campaigns to international bodies or open letters in newspapers. They wanted to channel the anger into polite action, to show the world they sought change without violence. Obi's campaign team posted statements on their website, thanking supporters for staying calm and promising more news soon. They emphasized unity and respect, reminding everyone that insults would not break their resolve. Inside Peter Obi's private residence, the mood was somber yet steady. He sat in a modest living room, walls painted pale green, with windows letting in warm afternoon light. Photographs of past campaigns and community visits lined the shelves. He held a cup of tea but did not drink. His team members waited quietly. Around him, each showing the signs of long hours and hard work. Obi looked at each face and spoke softly, said, "This is a moment to be careful. We must not stoop to insults. We must show that our movement is about respect and dignity." His calm voice carried weight. Sense of trust settled in the room. He knew that his words would travel further if he kept to his principles. Outside his house, supporters gathered at the gates. They held blue and white balloons and chanted Obi's name with renewed energy. Many wore masks to protect against the city heat. Some carried water bottles. Few had printed signs reading "Respect Democracy" and "No Place for Insults." Children perched on parents' shoulders, curious about the commotion. Nearby journalists snapped photos and asked quick questions, but the mood stayed peaceful. When asked how they felt, a schoolteacher named Amma said, "We feel hurt, but we will not give up. Our dreams are bigger than insults." As night fell, candles appeared in windows across neighborhoods. People lit them for hope, for unity, for the future they believed in. They thought of the insult and felt a mix of anger and disappointment. Yet they also felt determined. They whispered prayers for peaceful solutions. They talked about tomorrow's rallies, about speeches they would give, about letters they would write. In lonely streets, lights glowed like distant stars. Each flame a promise to keep respect alive. In that way, the insult did not weaken the movement, it strengthened it. It forced people to look deeper at their values and decide what kind of leaders they wished to follow. For Peter Obi and his supporters, the path remained clear. They would continue their work without sinking into the same traps their opponents used. They would prove that dignity and kindness could carry a nation forward. As the candles burned, softly in the dark, quiet transformation began, one fueled by hope and held aloft by steady hearts, determined to build a better tomorrow. Peter Obi woke early the next morning before the sun had fully risen and sat alone on the edge of his simple wooden chair. The soft light of dawn filtered through thin curtains, painting the room in gentle gold, letting the warmth flow through him, and thought about the insult at the summit. There was no anger in his heart, only a steady determination to act with dignity. He knew that to build a movement he needed calm focus, not loud words. By mid-morning, he stepped into a waiting car with a few close aides. The streets of Onitsha bustled with traders calling out prices. Women selling spices in woven baskets, and children running along sidewalks. Obi watched from the tinted window as life carried on, even as tensions ran high. He felt the pulse of ordinary Nigerians in their daily routines, and he carried their hopes with him. He arrived at the small office of a local civil society group that promoted fair elections and youth engagement. Inside, young activists greeted him with polite bows and warm smiles. The walls were lined with posters urging peaceful protest and voter education. Obi settled into a plastic chair at the long table where bottles of water and notebooks were already laid out. Around him, the young leaders exchanged glances of excitement and relief. They had feared his next move might be harsh or reactive, but his calm demeanor reassured them. A young woman named Ifama spoke first. Her voice trembled slightly with emotion, but held firm conviction. She said, "Mr. Obi, your supporters are ready to march, but they need guidance. Some fear that without strong direction, the marches could turn chaotic." Obi nodded, understood their concerns. The memory of violence and past protests weighed on him. He wanted a different path. one that showed strength through self-control. He replied softly, "Our aim is to be heard, not to harm. We will plan events carefully. We will teach everyone to stand firm in peace." He leaned forward and outlined a simple plan. Community forums in each town where people could speak their fears and hopes. Training sessions for marshals, who would guide crowds, clear routes mapped in collaboration with local authorities, and designated spokespeople who would deliver short, respectful statements. His words were measured, each one chosen to build confidence without inciting anger. The activists scribbled notes and nodded. They thanked him and departed to begin preparations. Obi stepped outside and felt the sun climb higher. He walked down the dusty street to a nearby market, where he greeted vendors and paused to sample roasted groundnuts. A vendor offered him a handful, and he smiled as he crunched through the warm nuts. "How are you feeling today?" she asked. He answered honestly. "We move forward carefully. We will show that respect and strength can walk together." The vendor nodded and blessed his efforts. Next, he traveled to a community center in Nui, a town known for its busy workshops and electronics shops. There, he met with elders, women's groups, and youth clubs. The center was a large hall with bright plastic chairs arranged in a circle. The air carried the faint smell of cooking. Fires outside. He listened as people spoke of their daily struggles: steady power supply, school fees they could barely afford, worries about safety on the roads. He did not dismiss these concerns. Instead, he linked them to the broader need for good governance. A middle-aged man named Chaik said, "We believe in you, sir. But we are tired. Our trust was broken." Obi looked at him kindly and replied, "Trust grows slowly, like a tree that takes years to bear fruit. We must water it with honesty, transparency, and patience." He asked the group to help him identify local champions, people they trusted who could speak at gatherings. He promised to train these champions in clear messaging and nonviolent discipline. After the meeting, Obi walked out into the late afternoon sun. A group of students from a nearby university approached him shyly. They held flyers calling for a peaceful rally in the campus square. He accepted a flyer and examined its text. In simple, bold letters, it invited students to join a march. For respect, he smiled and told them they could count on full support. But he urged them to keep their messages positive and their actions peaceful. The students beamed, energized by his words. Late that day, back in his modest guest house, Obi reviewed messages on his phone. Journalists from international outlets had requested interviews. He typed a brief reply. "I will speak about our plan. Tomorrow, my message remains clear. We stand for fair process, peaceful dialogue, and progress for all Nigerians." He thought about how easy it would be to lash out on live TV, to fire back at insults with sharper insults, but he refused. Believed that true leadership meant rising above petty attacks. Early the next morning, a small team gathered to plan a live radio broadcast. In many villages, radio was the primary way people received news. Obi sat before the microphone in a humble studio, its walls lined with soundproofing foam. The presenter began the show, and soon Obi's calm voice filled listeners' radios across the region. He spoke of his respect for the office of the presidency, even when he disagreed with its holder, spoke of the need for unity and for channeling disappointment into constructive action. His tone was warm, like a teacher guiding attentive students. He laid out the schedule: community forums over the coming week, youth training sessions, and a peaceful rally next Saturday in Onitsha. He emphasized clear rules: no hate slogans, no violence, and a commitment to clean up after each event. He closed by thanking listeners for their trust and inviting them to join hands in building a better future. After the broadcast, messages of support poured in. A radio caller said, "Your words give me hope. I've been afraid to speak." Another called to ask how to volunteer. Obi's team scrambled to add names to mailing lists and set up WhatsApp groups for organizers. The quiet resolve he had cultivated was now spreading among many voices in homes, shops, and schools. Meanwhile, in Abuja, the capital, international diplomats watched carefully. They had heard of Obi's steady approach and of the avoidance of violent clashes. Reports reached them of orderly gatherings, respectful speeches, and clean streets afterward. Western envoys noted that a strong, disciplined response could gain international sympathy. They began to press Tinubu's team to address grievances through dialogue rather than force. Obi's calm posture had begun to shift power back to negotiation. In the villages dotted through Anambra and Enugu states, elders sat under mango trees and discussed upcoming forums. They wondered whether young people, who often moved quickly and spoke loudly, could maintain the discipline Obi asked for. But when youth leaders visited and explained the training they had received, elders nodded with approval. They told the young men and women, "This is your chance to show the world what respect looks like." On the day of the first forum in Nui, people gathered under a white tent in the school field. Obi arrived walking slowly, greeting each person by name. He gestured for silence and spoke softly about the insult he had endured. He said, "We could respond with anger, but we choose respect. We choose to show our strength by keeping our heads high." He paused and let those words sink in. Then he asked each participant to share one idea for improving daily life. Voices rose and fell. Some spoke of better roads, others of more reliable water supply, many of fairer education opportunities. When the session ended, volunteers moved through the crowd, distributing flyers with clear steps on how to join the rally and how to spread the message of peaceful protest. People left with a sense of purpose and a plan of action. They had seen respectful leadership in practice, and they felt part of something real. In his guesthouse room that evening, Obi wrote in his journal, "Today showed the power of quiet resolve. Anger is loud, peace is strong." He closed the book and leaned back on his bed. Outside, stars appeared, each one small but steady. They reminded him of the many individual lights now shining across Nigeria, each guided by hope and dignity. The next morning, as he prepared to travel to another town, his phone buzzed with messages from fellow candidates and community leaders. Some praised his approach. Others asked for advice on how to replicate his model in their own states. His simple plan of calm coordination was spreading like ripples on a pond as the sun rose again. Peter Obi stepped into his car, ready for another day of careful work. He knew that insults would come again, and that some would doubt his gentle methods. But he also knew that by refusing to fight fire with fire, he was building something stronger, a movement defined by respect, unity, and clear action. And in that steady, quiet resolve, he saw the promise of lasting change for his country. In the heart of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore sat behind a simple wooden desk in his modest office. The walls were painted a warm beige, and a single ceiling fan spun slowly above, barely stirring the afternoon heat. Outside the tall windows, the city buzzed with life, motorcycles weaving through traffic, street vendors calling out their prices, children playing football in dusty alleys. Traore watched the scene through half-closed blinds, his dark eyes thoughtful. He had heard about the insult President Tinubu made to Peter Obi at the ECOWAS summit. The words "daydreamer" had echoed across West African radio waves, and they had landed here too. Traore set aside the papers he had been reviewing, reports on border security and regional trade, and reached for his phone. He scrolled through messages from journalists and diplomats asking for comment. He knew that what he said next would matter. In a region where leaders often spoke in guarded terms, a clear voice of respect could carry far. He tapped out a brief note to his communications team. Prepare a press conference in 2 hours. He would speak from the state broadcaster's studio downtown. His plan was simple: condemn the insult, praise healthy debate, and ask all leaders to rise above personal jabs. Inside the small press room, the air conditioner hummed quietly. Bright lights shone down on a podium set with a single microphone and a small Burkina Faso flag. Dozens of cameras stood on tripods, and journalists from various African news agencies waited in neat rows. When Traore arrived, they straightened their notebooks and switched on recorders. He wore a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark trousers. His expression was calm but firm. He stepped to the podium, offered a slight nod, and waited for the studio director's cue. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice clear over the microphones. "I wish to address recent events at the ECOWAS summit in Abuja." He paused as a camera flashed. "I was saddened to hear that President Tinubu publicly insulted a fellow African leader, Mr. Peter Obi. He spoke the names carefully, showing respect. In our region, we must uphold the dignity of each person, even in disagreement." He leaned forward slightly. "To call someone a daydreamer in front of peers is unworthy of the office we hold. We must remember that words have power. They can inspire or they can wound." Traore took a breath, glanced at the rows of cameras, then continued. "Mr. Obi has shown remarkable calm and focus in this challenging time. He has called for peaceful action and constructive dialogue. I applaud his restraint. It is a model for how leaders and citizens alike can respond to provocation, not by matching anger with anger, but by choosing respect and unity." He allowed a quiet moment to settle. Some reporters shifted in their seats, surprised by the direct praise of a Nigerian opposition figure. "As Africans, we share a common destiny," Traore went on. "Our strength lies not in insults or harsh words, but in open conversation and mutual understanding. I call on all West African leaders to engage in debate with courtesy and firmness. Let us address our differences with ideas, not insults." He ended his statement and nodded once, signaling the press conference was over. The sound of rapid camera shutters and scribbling pens filled the room for a few seconds. Then the director asked for the next speaker. Back in his office a short while later, Traore watched the replay of his address on television. Studio anchors praised his tone, calling him a courageous voice of principle. Tweets flew by on the screen. "Captain Traore speaks truth. West Africa needs more leaders like him." He allowed himself a small smile. He felt a quiet satisfaction. He believed that showing respect for a political opponent, one from another country, demonstrated true leadership. News of his statement spread quickly. In Accra, Ghana, young activists held an impromptu rally, waving banners that read "Respect and Leadership" and chanting Traore's name alongside Obi's. In Lagos, some of Obi's supporters watched the footage and cheered. They felt their cause had found a friend in an unexpected place. Across social media, messages praised Traore's courage to speak out. Many pointed out that he was a young leader himself, still in his 30s, and his words carried the hopes of a new generation of Africans. In his office, Traore's advisors entered with updates. They told him that ECOWAS officials were quietly discussing how to smooth tensions. Some envoys wanted Nigeria's delegation to issue a formal apology. Others suggested a private meeting. Between Tinubu and Obi, Traore listened as they outlined different scenarios. He nodded and said, "Our job is not to force anyone's hand, but to remind everyone of our shared values." He asked them to draft a follow-up letter to the summit, reiterating his call for respectful dialogue among member states. Later that afternoon, he walked through a bustling market street with a small entourage. Stall owners greeted him politely as he passed. A woman selling bright cloths held out a bolt of fabric. "Captain, your words gave us hope," she said, her voice firm despite the sun's heat. He thanked her and asked her how she thought leadership in Africa could improve. She replied, "By listening, by showing respect to all, even to those we disagree with." Traore nodded, taking her words to heart. In the days that followed, Traore's address continued to make headlines. Newspapers printed his full remarks. On their front pages, popular radio talk show in Bamako invited him for an extended discussion. He spoke gently about the importance of unity and respectful debate. He said that when leaders showed courtesy, citizens would follow their example. He spoke of Africa's potential when guided by leaders who lifted each other up rather than tearing each other down. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, Peter Obi's campaign team noticed the wave of support Traore's words created. They shared the footage on Obi's official channels, thanking the Burkina Faso leader for his solidarity. Obi himself recorded a short message. "I thank Captain Traore for reminding us that respect must guide our words. Even in hard times," he spoke softly and sincerely. His supporters shared this message widely, feeling a boost of international validation for their peaceful approach. Across ECOWAS capitals, dinner conversations turned to Traore's speech. In Dakar, Senegal, a professor of political science, praised him as a breath of fresh air. He wrote an op-ed in the local newspaper, arguing that regional bodies needed more voices like Traore's to guide debates. In Monrovia, Liberia, youth activists cited his address during their own peaceful protests, carrying placards quoting his call for respectful dialogue. Captain Traore understood that words alone could not solve all conflicts. He knew that challenges remained: security issues in the Sahel, economic inequalities, climate threats. Yet he believed that changing the tone of political debate was a crucial first step. By publicly standing up for respect even toward a rival politician in another nation, he had set a new example. He hoped that summit participants would remember this the next time they took the stage. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of orange and violet, Traore returned to his home on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. His family greeted him at the gate. His young daughter ran forward, calling, "Papa, did you see the news? Everyone is talking about your speech." He scooped her up and smiled. Inside, over a simple dinner of rice and vegetables, he told his children stories of past African leaders who had bridged divides with words of peace. He gently reminded them that leadership was as much about listening and kindness as it was about strength. Before sleeping, he reviewed the week's events in his mind. He thought of the applause from journalists, the cheers of activists, and the relief in Obi's supporters' messages. He thought of the woman in the market of youths. Carrying his quotes on placards, he felt hope stirring not just in Nigeria, but across West Africa. A single speech could ripple outward, creating small waves of change in distant places. As he lay in bed, he wondered what would come next. He knew Tinubu might respond, perhaps with a curt remark or an apology. He knew Peter Obi would continue his calm campaign in Nigeria, but regardless, he trusted that setting a tone of respect had already changed something fundamental. He believed that when leaders chose dignity over insult, they invited citizens to do the same. He closed his eyes, feeling the gentle night breeze through the window, slept with a sense of quiet accomplishment, knowing that his voice had echoed beyond borders and that, in doing so, he had helped to shape a kinder path for all of West Africa. The moment Ibrahim Traore's words reached the wider public, their impact rippled through West Africa like a sudden gust of wind stirring still waters. In Accra, Ghana's busy streets were already alive with the sounds of morning traffic when news channels replayed his address. Taxi drivers paused their radios and passengers leaned forward to catch every syllable. He spoke with such respect, one driver said to his friend beside him. He reminded us what leadership should look like. Small groups formed at roadside stalls, huddled around tiny television screens to watch the clip again. In markets and offices alike, people nodded in agreement, repeating the call for respectful debate. Meanwhile, in Dakar, Senegal University, students organized an informal gathering under the shade of baobab trees. They called it a conversation for courtesy, inspired by Traore's words. Young men and women carried hand-painted banners quoting lines from his speech. "We must address our differences with ideas, not insults." They sat in circles on the grass, sipping sweet hibiscus tea, and shared stories of times when harsh words had deepened divisions in their own communities. As the sun climbed higher, they drafted a petition urging all ECOWAS member states to adopt a code of conduct for summit speeches, one that emphasized civility and constructive dialogue. Their voices were calm but determined, embodying the very spirit Traore had championed back in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. The summit continued against a backdrop of growing tension. Diplomats and delegates arrived for their next session, but whispers filled the corridors. ECOWAS officials held closed-door meetings, their faces taut with concern. Some worried that the insult and its fallout could derail important economic talks. Others feared that Nigeria's leadership might feel cornered and lash out in other ways. In a conference room lined with national flags, representatives of smaller countries urged Tinubu's team to reach out to Obi, to bridge the gap before it widened further. A few delegates scribbled notes, planning possible interventions by the West African Commission on Human Rights. The atmosphere was electric, charged with both hope and uncertainty. At the same time, Nigeria's military leaders watched events unfold from their command posts. Though they rarely spoke publicly on political matters, some senior officers recognized the growing unrest among young Nigerians. They noted the rise in peaceful protests organized by Obi's supporters and the spike in online discussions about Traore's address. A confidential briefing circulated among high-ranking officers. It warned that continued anger could lead to violence, and it urged caution. The generals preferred stability to conflict, and they feared that heavy-handed responses might backfire. In whispered conversations, they debated whether to advise Tinubu to soften his stance or to reiterate the nation's strength. The choice was fraught. Each path carried risks. In Lagos, Nigeria's largest city, the morning newspapers carried bold headlines. One tabloid read, "Burkina leaders call for respect, shakes ECOWAS." Another broadsheet asked, "Can civility save?" West Africa. Street vendors stacked fresh copies in neat piles, and eager readers purchased them for a naira or two. Coffee shops served customers who carried papers in one hand and sipped hot drinks with the other. Across the tables, friends debated whether Tinubu's insult was a mistake or a calculated move. Some argued that it exposed Obi's weakness. Others countered that it revealed Tinubu's insecurity. In both opinions, Traore's voice kept returning to the conversation, as if a new benchmark for statesmanship had been set. Beyond Nigeria and Burkina Faso, ordinary citizens across West Africa waited with interest. In Conakry, Guinea, a group of community leaders invited a local journalist to speak about the unfolding story. They gathered in the courtyard of a neighborhood center, where women sold grilled fish and children chased each other around crates. The journalist played video clips on a small laptop, showing snapshots of the summit and Traore's press conference. The leaders discussed what respect and leadership meant for their own towns, many of which had seen tensions flare during local elections. They resolved to host their own forums, taking inspiration from Peter Obi's community meetings in Nigeria, though they faced different challenges. The core idea remained the same: dialogue built on dignity. Meanwhile, international media took note. African correspondents filed reports to newsrooms in London, New York, and Paris. European analysts discussed the episode during morning broadcasts, highlighting the potential precedent for how African leaders might engage one another in the future. Some op-eds praised Traore's courage and contrasted it with insults exchanged among leaders elsewhere in the world. Others pointed out that words alone were never enough. They argued that meaningful change required action, yet even critics agreed that a call for respectful debate was rare and powerful. Within Obi's campaign headquarters in Onitsha, excitement buzzed through the air. Staff members monitored social media trends on large screens, watching hashtags such as #respect in West Africa climbed steadily. Volunteers shared posts of Traore's speech, adding captions like "A new era of leadership" and "We stand for unity." Obi himself appeared in a video message, expressing his gratitude for the solidarity and echoing the call for civil discourse. He said, "When leaders show respect, citizens will follow." Let this be the start of new conversations across our continent. His face glowed with hope, and supporters cheered as the video played for them on handheld devices. As the week progressed, Kawa summit sessions shifted in tone. Panels on trade and security opened with brief reflections on the importance of respectful dialogue. Some chairpersons invited delegates to agree on shared principles of conduct. A draft declaration circulated calling on member states to commit to civil debate and nonviolent responses to disagreements. Whether it would pass remained uncertain. The very proposal marked a change from the usual summit agendas in Nigeria's northern states. Where local leaders often faced ethnic tensions, community elders took notice. They held precautionary gatherings reminding youth groups that protests must remain peaceful and respectful. They used Traore's speech as an example, telling young people that strong voices could be heard best when they spoke with dignity. Rural schools even organized essay contests on the power of respect in leadership, awarding prizes like books and stationery. Teachers told students that Africa's future depended not only on policies, but also on the tone of its conversations. Thousands of miles away in Paris, an African diaspora gathering featured a panel discussion on the incident. Young professionals and students debated how to bring the spirit of respectful debate into their own communities abroad. They spoke of organizing dialogue circles in churches, mosques, and community centers, using Traore's call as a starting point. The room buzzed with energy as participants planned events that blended cultural celebration with discussions on civic engagement. They concluded that respectful conversation was a universal need, not just a regional one. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traore continued his daily routine. He met with his economic advisors in the morning, discussed infrastructure projects in the afternoon, and checked in on regional security reports at night. Yet he also received messages from unexpected corners: a letter from a professor in Cape d'Ivoire, a poem from a student in Sierra Leone, a song written by a poet in Mali. All praised his stand for respect. He folded each message carefully, letting their words remind him of the broader purpose behind his leadership. As the fourth day of the summit drew to a close, ECOWAS officials invited Tinubu and Obi to join. A moderated roundtable discussion. The session was rare. 2 Nigerian figures, one president, one opposition leader, on the same stage. Cameras rolled as they sat across from each other, with a neutral chairperson in between. Tinubu spoke first. Noting the gravity of the summit's work, Obi followed, expressing his commitment to Nigeria's progress. When asked about their recent clash, both men paused. Tinubu nodded toward Obi and said, "Perhaps my words were too sharp." Obi smiled gently and replied, "Our aim is unity. I accept your apology." The room exhaled as reporters captured the moment. Even if brief, the exchange demonstrated that respect could heal wounds. In that instant, the continent seemed to hold its breath. A new tone took hold, one where leaders could admit mistakes, apologize, and move forward together. The shockwaves of insult had given way to ripples of reconciliation. Newspapers published photos of the handshake on their front pages, alongside echoes of Traore's original call. Radio stations replayed the audio clip of that apology next to the recording of Traore's address. Social media feeds flooded with side-by-side images, celebrating the power of respectful dialogue as night fell over West Africa. Lights glowed in homes from Lagos to Dakar, Bamako to Accra. Families gathered around screens witnessing a moment that transcended national politics. It was a reminder that leaders, like all people, could choose words that heal rather than harm. And in that choice lay the promise of a new chapter for a continent long defined by both its challenges and its boundless potential. The shockwaves of insult had given way to waves of hope, and across the lands of Peter Obi stood on the small stage in Onitsha, looking out at a sea of faces lit by lanterns and phone lights. The air was warm and still, and the crowd waited in silence. He took a deep breath and felt a quiet pride. In the past days, his message of calm respect had spread across Nigeria and beyond. Tonight, he would speak not only to his own supporters, but to people who had watched from other countries and wondered if peaceful change was possible. He began by thanking everyone for coming. His voice carried across the open square, clear and steady. "We have shown," he said, "that when we speak with respect, we can be heard by many." He paused and let the thought sink in. People nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes, where he told them how Ibrahim Traore's words had inspired millions, and how they had turned an insult into an opportunity for unity. He spoke of the handshake at the summit where respect had replaced anger. As he spoke, he moved across the stage with calm confidence, never rushing, never raising his voice too high. Behind him, volunteers handed out copies of a simple leaflet. It described steps people could take to stay involved, joining community councils, writing letters to local leaders, teaching children how to speak kindly, even when they disagreed. Peter Obi pointed to the leaflets and said, "Change lives not with fights, but with words that build trust." The crowd cheered softly, a sound like waves breaking gently on a shore. In the front row, a young man held his daughter on his shoulder. The little girl waved a paper flag that read hope. Her father explained later that he had watched the summit coverage with his wife and felt a spark of belief in the future. They had decided to bring their children tonight to show them that they could shape their world. As Peter Obi spoke, they saw their own dreams reflected in his calm words. Across Nigeria, similar gatherings took place. In Kano, elders met at a community hall decorated with blue and white banners. They agreed to host weekly meetings where citizens could voice their concerns in safe spaces. In Enugu, teachers organized classes for students on peaceful debate using examples from recent events. They set up mock summits in their classrooms, encouraging children to practice respectful speech. In rural towns, radio stations aired special programs that replayed Peter Obi's key lines, reminding listeners that dignity could change the tone of a nation. Meanwhile, in Abuja, a small group of ECOWAS officials reviewed the summit declaration. They discussed adding a formal code of conduct for leaders' speeches, inspired by the new commitment to respectful dialogue. They debated details, how to encourage leaders to apologize when they spoke too harshly, how to involve youth representatives in future summits. The final draft of the declaration would ask member states to promote civil debate in schools and public forums. It was a small step, but it had roots in the shock of an insult and the hope of a response that valued respect. Bola Tinubu, back in his office, faced questions about the summit events. Journalists asked if he regretted his words. He replied carefully that he stood by his right to speak. But he also acknowledged that he had heard the concerns of many Nigerians. He said he looked forward to working with Peter Obi and other voices to improve the nation. While some doubted his sincerity, others saw in his speech a sign that the tide was turning toward cooperation. In time, his office began reaching out to Obi's team to discuss joint community projects. It was a surprising move, but it showed that the atmosphere of respect was changing even the highest offices. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traore continued his work on border security and trade agreements. He smiled when his advisors told him about new petitions and youth initiatives. He arranged for a group of Nigerian civil society leaders to visit Burkina Faso to learn from each other's peaceful organizing methods. He believed that cross-border friendship could strengthen the whole region. When they arrived, he welcomed them warmly, and they exchanged ideas about respectful leadership. They toured local schools, where students had written essays about peace and unity. The Nigerians thanked Traore for his courage, and he thanked them for carrying his message further. In homes across West Africa, families talked around dinner tables about recent events. Parents told children that leaders could disagree without hate. Grandparents spoke of past struggles and said they never imagined a day when a word like respect would unite people across borders. Young adults posted stories on social media about small acts of kindness they planned, writing polite letters to local officials, organizing litter cleanups after rallies, inviting neighbors to friendly debates. In community centers, they felt that a new era of thoughtful conversation was beginning. International observers took note too. A university in London invited Peter Obi and Ibrahim Traore to speak in a virtual seminar about leadership and civility. Thousands registered for the event. During the session, Obi explained how he had chosen calm action over anger. Traore described why he had stood up publicly for respect. In the question period, students from many countries asked how they could apply these lessons in their own communities. Both speakers encouraged them to start small, in schools, in work, in social media exchanges. They emphasized that respect needed practice in everyday moments. Back in Nigeria, local governments began to adopt new guidelines for public meetings. Town halls were asked to start sessions with a moment of calm reflection. Speakers were reminded to avoid insulting language. Police officers were instructed to protect peaceful gatherings rather than disperse them at the first sign of crowd noise. Civic groups trained volunteers in conflict resolution techniques, helping community members talk through disagreements without shouting or threats. These small rules and trainings seemed to carry Peter Obi's vision into daily life. Over the following weeks, opposition and ruling party members started meeting in shared spaces to discuss joint community service projects. In one town, they painted a school together. In another, they planted trees along a busy road. Each time, they carried banners that said, "Building together in both parties' colors." Journalists covered these events as stories of unity beyond politics. Crowds gathered not for speeches but for shared tasks. Volunteers swapped stories, laughed, and learned each other's names. In those moments, respect turned into real friendship. At a youth conference in Accra, a group of students created a short play based on the events. They acted out a scene where two leaders insulted each other on stage, only to be reminded by a young hero that respect meant more than victory. The play ended with the leaders shaking hands and inviting everyone to work together. The audience cheered, and some wiped tears. After the show, the actors spoke to the crowd about how they had learned the power of kind words. The play was recorded and shared widely online, spreading the message further. In remote villages, community radio stations aired stories from other regions showing how respectful dialogue had led to real change. Listeners called in to share their own examples of gentle leadership. One woman said she had persuaded her town council to fund a water project by writing a polite letter and offering to help with the work. A farmer described how he settled a land dispute with a neighbor by listening carefully rather than raising his voice. Each story inspired the next, building a chain of peaceful action. One evening, Peter Obi returned to Onitsha for a final public address before a long tour of community visits. He looked out at the crowd, now larger than before, stretching into the distance. He felt the weight of their trust and the warmth of their support. He spoke of the journey from insult to respect, from anger to unity. He thanked Ibrahim Traore and all those who had joined in this new movement. He asked everyone to keep the spirit alive, to speak kindly, to listen well, and to work together for lasting progress. As the event ended, people stayed behind to talk in small groups. They planned new forums, new service projects, new ways to keep respect at the center of their lives. Children ran around with handmade flags, and elders shared gentle laughter. The lanterns and phone lights flickered like stars, each one a promise of hope. Peter Obi walked through the crowd, shaking hands and offering quiet words of thanks. He knew the real work would continue long after the lights went out. Far beyond Nigeria's borders, news of these gatherings reached neighboring countries. In schools in Togo and Sierra Leone, teachers used videos of the events and lessons on citizenship. Radio debates in Mali and Côte d'Ivoire included discussions on respectful speech. Young activists formed online groups to share strategies and stories. They called themselves Voices of Respect, pledging to carry the message wherever they went. In the weeks that followed, polls showed a shift in public opinion. Many Nigerians reported feeling more hopeful about their country's future. They said they believed leaders could change and that citizens could play a role in guiding them. Across West Africa, support for civil debate rose, and people reported feeling more willing to listen to those they disagreed with. The shock of an insult had set off a chain reaction that grew into a movement of respect. Late one night, Peter Obi sat alone in a quiet room, reading messages from supporters in distant towns. He smiled as he saw stories of small successes. A peaceful candlelight vigil, a community cleanup, a respectful letter that led to a new clinic.